If you've ever waxed poetic talking about a firearm, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Guys, like and comment. The comment section is most certainly out of control. I do nothing control you guys. Make sure that you get in there and find out why my comment section is probably the reason I'll end up getting banned from YouTube, but keep it in there, you savages. Guys, the biggest support of the channel right now is Big Daddy Unlimited. Big Daddy Unlimited being the Costco of the gun world, 99 cents for the first month. After that, price goes up. Is it worth it? Well, if you buy products, yes. If not, no. We have a couple other sponsors of this particular video. We have Acre Gold, No Name Armory, which of course has ammunition, mostly in stock, and Cool Fire Trainer for that dry fire training, but you're still getting that recoil, so it's a pretty cool system. Ladies and gentlemen, my often forgotten, but most certainly not by me, Surefire Suppressors, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a very cool rifle, and that is going to be the M4A1 Block 2. You can call it a bunch of things. Call it the SOP Mod Block 2, SOP Mod version 2, whatever you want to call it. It is one of the current weapons now being phased out that was used from about 2012-ish up until very recently when it was replaced by the URGI, or as what it's affectionately called, the Block 3. So before we get into this particular rifle, let's do our full disclosure. So what is my relationship with Crane, who helped develop this? Nothing. That being said, some of the products like Daniel Defense, Surefire, Elcan, I do have relationships with those companies in that I have done reviews for those particular companies. Now, in this case, I don't have any inclination to say good or bad things about them because this is simply about the program and how it kind of improved the M4. But in any case, let's get into it. So if you're not familiar with the Block program, the SOP Mod program, essentially here's how it goes. You have the M4. The M4 is a fairly good platform. However, the M16, when it was designed, was not designed to be under that 20-inch barrel length. Of course, further developments led to much shorter guns, obviously like we have right now. But when Sonar originally designed it, you had the 20-inch barrel and everything worked perfectly. As you start chopping down that barrel length and shortening that gas system, you run into a whole host of issues. There is no free lunch when it comes to firearm design or anything in general. So in the case of the M4, you had dwell time issues, problems with bolt velocity, problems with the way even the magazines were feeding in due to the increased velocity of the bolt carrier. Because of this, the M4 went under many revisions to get to the point that it's at now, where it's a very reliable platform. And perhaps one of those platforms that we have to talk about today is, in my opinion, one of the finest combat rifles that has ever been fielded in the history of any military ever, which is not really talked about that much, and that is the Block 2 M4 specifically. So we're going to speak a little bit to this, to what improvements were made to the M4. Now, before we get into that, I think it's important to note our information and give dues where dues are due, essentially. So we have to thank Chris over from Small Arms Solutions, a great individual. I'd highly recommend watching his channel. He's forgotten more about them than any of us have ever learned. So I can't say enough good things about his channel and his information. Definitely go check him out, especially for his in-depth reviews of the M4A1. Of course, Mike, Mr. Guns and Gear, a big thank you to him as well. And certain individuals at Crane, you guys know who you are. Thank you for talking with me on this particular platform. So popping up a picture of the SOP Mod right now. The SOP Mod program was developed to increase operator survivability, lethality by enhanced weapon performance, target acquisition, signature reduction, and fire control. So there was a lot of goals with the SOP Mod program. Ultimately, I think it hit all those goals. There were certainly a lot of interesting things that occurred along that way. Now, to start off with, there were lots of reports of problems with M4s around the 2004-2006 time period. This is due to a variety of reasons. Some of them overblown, some of them real. There were QC issues that were occurring at Colt, which at the time was the main manufacturer of the M4 and M16 rifles. These issues were, of course, resolved. I'd highly recommend going to Small Arms channel for talks about that. Now, during that time, there was a lot of dust tests that were performed with different weapons, and essentially there was no good conclusion because the tests weren't exactly that good, and the M4 was stuck with, and this was a good thing. The SOP mod program improved upon where the M4A1 was at the time and brought it to the Block 2 variant. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what we always do. We're going to go tip to butt in this entire rifle, and we're going to talk about how it differed from the M4, what makes it such a good platform, and we're just going to go ahead and delve into it. Now, to start off with, what makes, I think, a combat rifle quite good, in my opinion, is a multitude of factors, but, you know, kind of getting down to the crux of it, the weapon has to be reliable. So it has to be able to function in harsh environments, and harsh environments being anything from your deserts to your frozen tundras, to your forests, to wet environments, to what have you. The point is it must function in all adverse conditions. In addition, on top of that, it must be consistent. So it has to be consistent in that reliability, as well as being consistent in accuracy and precision. Now, in my mind, the M4A1 Block 2 is perhaps all of those things wrapped up into a whole. Now, there is no free lunch. The thing does weigh a little bit more than your typical M4, but again, like we always say, get in the gym, train a little bit. So to start off with, we have our suppressors. Now, this is, of course, a Surefire SOCOM RC. SOCOM RC2s are also used, as are Knight's Armament NT4s. Now, there are many suppressors that are better than both the SOCOM and the NT4. Some suppressors are better at flash reduction. Some suppressors are much quieter. Both the NT4 and the SOCOM are a little bit loud. Some suppressors can withstand heat better. Some suppressors way less. But few suppressors do all these things fairly well, and at the same time are absolute tanks. The NT4 and the SOCOM RC are absolute tanks of suppressors. Now, they don't perform the best at everything. That being said, they will run 50,000+ rounds, no problem. This particular Surefire suppressor has around 80,000+ rounds on it. I did a video on it previously, and this is pretty much the norm for Surefire SOCOM suppressors. Of course, they do become leaded as the lead deposits in the baffles, and they do become heavy. Despite that, they are excellent suppressors, and that goes for the NT4 as well, which is also an excellent muzzle device. So again, this is kind of the theme you're going to see with the Block 2, which is heavy, but extremely reliable. Getting over to the muzzle device, there are several different muzzle devices that are used in the Block 2 program. Initially, you're much more limited than what you are now, but the main muzzle device that was used was a 4-prong. So to show you a 4-prong, we have this URGI, which is one of the newer blocks, and we have a 4-prong flash suppressor from Surefire. This is a go-to for a long time. Only more recently did we see Ranger Regiment and a couple other entities trying out the War Comp and using them on their work rifles. Most of my friends who ended up switching to the War Comp ended up taking it off after a short amount of time due to the increased concussion, especially in CQB. This was not a very conductive muzzle device for warfare, essentially. On top of that, these top ports right here don't make for the best environment for a suppressor, and the suppressor just doesn't work as well with a War Comp. So overall, the winner of this ended up being the 4-prong, which is still used today. Understand that besides these muzzle devices, you of course have the Knight's muzzle devices, or of course the normal birdcage flash hiders, depending on the type of unit that you're at. That being said, I do find that the Surefires are an excellent muzzle device. They do a very good job at taming the flash and even the recoil coming out of your Block 2 M4s. Now, when it comes to Surefire, I do think that they're perhaps one of the best picks, and even on guns I'm using right now, I find that the Surefires, in my opinion, are perhaps one of the best designs out there, notwithstanding the B.E. Myers and a couple others out there. And that brings us to another great point, which is our barrel. Now, the barrel does kind of blend into the M4A1 program, and we'll talk about that right now. So there are two types of barrels that are typically used on your Block 2 variants. You have both the SOCOM profile as well as the M4 profile. It's your standard government profile. Now, the SOCOM, as you know, is a very famous barrel in that it's incredibly, incredibly accurate. The SOCOM profile barrels will easily handle and do sub-MOA with the correct ammunition. No problem. They are about 14.5 inches long, and then of course with your muzzle device on there, a little bit more. But the point being is that they're incredibly reliable, because with the SOCOM, essentially what was happening is in certain special operation units, the typical TTPs for a retreat, kind of revolved around the M4 being used as a sort of a light machine gun. It was fired full auto, multiple magazines as the retreat was occurring. The M4 is a gas-operated, air-cooled weapon. It's not really meant to be run that way, and because of that, what would happen to the barrel is it would begin to reach a high temperature. And by around 1500 degrees, you have a transformation process which takes place, which can allow that metal to lose that heat treatment. And at that point, you have a barrel just waiting to burst, and that's no good. You don't want that to happen. So the SOCOM, what they did is they added a lot of material, essentially. They beefed up the areas that needed to be beefed up. And what happened because of this is that you have a very tough barrel. So typically, barrels would fail if you were just dumping these mag after mag on a typical government profile barrel around the 360 round mark, or about 11 to 12 mags. With the SOCOM barrels, I've seen 700 plus prior to any barrel kind of getting worn out. And typically from tests that have been run at Colt and other factories, what they found is that the barrel won't burst, but rather what will happen is that the barrel will erode to the point, because it's so hot, that the gases will begin to exit around the projectiles that's leaving the barrel and will lead to a failure at that point. And the fact of the matter is that the SOCOM is a very tough barrel. If you're running 20 plus mags for your M4, it's a bad day. You probably should get some type of light machine gun or crew-served weapon at that point. But the point is that the SOCOM barrel is excellent. And in addition to that, the barrel, just the way that the material was added, led to really good harmonics. And because of that, as that barrel whips, as the projectile travels down it, you just have excellent accuracy. And so enough can't be said about the barrel. Now, that being said, they are not cold hammer forged or anything like that. They're just the material is used, the twists accompanied with the weight just ended up hitting that sweet spot, and the SOCOM barrels are just chef's kiss. And another thing that really adds to that accuracy is the rail right here. Because with the standard M4A1, you do not have a free-floated rail. And what we mean by that is that handguard is not contacting that front gas block. And because of that, that allows the barrel to move more and allows for more accuracy. Even on the front sight post versions of the Block 2 M4, the SOCOM barrel is still capable of sub-MOA, so with a free-floated rail, you're seeing even better accuracy. And that brings us to our rail. So a thing that must be noted is that with the Block 3 M4s, so we have our URGI right here from Geisley, that while they are lighter and while they are thinner and they offer M-LOK and all that goodness and just look better and feel better, the problem is that M-LOK is just not as strong as a full-length Picatinny rail. So again, there's no free lunch, right? Because you have a lighter gun overall compared to the Block 2, but at the same time, what they've found is that when you're dropping these, you're having pretty bad barrel deflection. Essentially, the rail is bending, and you could possibly lose 0 on any type of IR devices or otherwise on the gun. And if it dented enough, you could possibly run into a problem where the gun could be rendered inoperable, such as shifting or stripping the barrel nut or something crazy like that. The point is that while these newer rails are very cool, I don't think that they had the combat prowess that ultimately the RIS-2 ones had. Now, of course, time will tell whether or not these kind of fully get kind of resolved and we end up having a really good rail here. But I'm inclined to believe that the RIS-2 overall was a better choice, and we'll get into that right now. Now, while the amount of Picatinny on this particular rail is certainly overkill and was not needed in every place that it was, this added a lot of strength and rigidity. Very famously, Larry Vickers took an M4, like dropped out of a helicopter with this rail on it, shot with a shotgun, blew it up, and the thing continued to run. I think it eventually failed when he shot with a shotgun and it impacted the rail at just the right place to bend it a little bit. But beyond that, these rails are just historically tough. They hold 0. They will not dent. You can easily beat somebody to death with one of these rails. I can't say enough good things about them. Now, of course, the downside is that they do weigh a bunch. That weighs quite a bit more than a lot of your rails that are out there in the market right now. So, and that kind of brings us back to the point that, you know, there's always a equal and opposite reaction to everything that you do. So in this case, you have a very strong rail. However, you have that weight with it. But as you can see, we're starting to build a story here. We have a very tough barrel and a very accurate barrel. We have a very tough rail. This leads to a lot of rigidity and a lot of strength and a lot of robustness to this system, which is what I think is absolutely paramount to a combat rifle. Something that is going to hit where you're shooting, and that you don't have to worry about where you drop this or it impacts a door super hard or what have you, that you're going to have to worry about this rifle failing. And that brings us to the gas system. So the gas system is certainly one of the weaker points on the M4A1 Block 2. But again, this was developed a little bit ago. I mean, in terms of M4 kind of development around the 2010-2013 timeframe, this was pretty forward thinking for the time. So we have a carbon length gas system. Compare that to the Block 3, which is a mid-length, which is just a better overall system for the barrel length that you have. Just leads to less parts wear. It's just better. It's just better to use. Now that being said, carbon length gas system does have more dwell time. Now, although it is a little bit harsher on the components, it is a very reliable system. So something can certainly be said about that. So there is, again, always a design process and kind of sacrifices you have to make in certain cases. And that gas system all links back to our buffer. So the buffer is typically an H2. I've seen H's run as well. It just depends on suppressor usage and that type of stuff. So that will be a little bit more user serviceable because it's quite easy to swap out your buffers as needed. As well, enhancing lethality, we have the PEC 15/UHP later on, /NGOL later on, and of course lights. Originally Insight, and then, of course, unit purchase Surefires later on, which is what we have here. We do have a front sight. We get a lot of questions about why the front sight is forward. That's quite easy. So if the front sight is turned the opposite way and you put the PEC up against it, it's very hard to get in there and flip that sight up just because of the way it is. So a lot of guys ended up turning them outside. Much easier to get to your front sight and flip it up. It's just one of the little quirks there because, again, you have to run your PEC pretty far back. You start getting the IR shadow off your rail. So the further up forward you have it, a little bit easier it is to kind of deal with that. Of course, you can move your PEC to the side, which some people do, and kind of shift around your light. There are multiple ways to skin a cat. This is how I run this one right here. Another important thing that happened around that time too is using enhanced magazines. A bunch of good improved magazine designs were, of course, offered at this time period. So of course we have good old P-mags, the good old HK steel mags. The point was that in addition to all the things that were done to make this a more robust rifle, so we had some good developments around that time that allowed for magazines to feed reliably despite terrible conditions. And so there's a lot to be said about the M4 and its relationship to its magazine design. So we can kind of leave it at that. Going over to the bolt, of course. So on the bolt, a lot of really good design changes were made in relation to its extraction ability. So with the M4A1, you had an upgrade in the O-ring as well as the extractor spring. This allowed for better extraction, which led to better reliability. So couple all that together, again, the good rail, the good barrel, a well-functioning gas system with an increased ability to extract and make sure that it's getting that round out of there, you have a very, very reliable, very robust system. And that wasn't, of course, just for the Block 2, that was, of course, for the M4A1 as well. At that time, there were, of course, other really good developments that were being made. Around this time period, we had Knights with the updated SR15 system. We had LMT with their updated bolt system. Both those systems included a whale tail just for increased ability to extract, as well as doing some relief cuts on the bolt lugs themselves to ensure for better unlocking and reliability. But those didn't end up being used. But in any case, it always begs the question, what would have Stoner done? Well, we have Knight's armament, so we pretty much know what he would have done. Moving back from there, we of course have our A2 pistol grip. So the A2 could easily be replaced, and you did see it replaced with quite a bit of different components out there. Typical safety right there, magazine release, all that goodness right there. Which brings us over to our trigger. So on triggers, we of course had mil-spec triggers, which were very common, but depending on the unit that you're at, you might have had one of the Geissele select fire triggers, which were excellent. Now, the closest in performance to the Geissele select fire triggers is the Geissele SSAE. That is what I have in this particular weapon right here, because unfortunately, I don't have an automatic, as it's a little bit more difficult to do so due to arbitrary gun laws. And again, gun laws are an infringement. All right, let's go ahead and let's feel that trigger together. This is a Geissele SSAE, about a 3.5-ish pound pull, if I remember correctly. Okay, so we have about 1.5 millimeters of play right there. Get into our first wall. Fucking love Geissele's. Okay, feel that reset. It's positive. Easy. Geissele's are incredible. In addition to that, they're also full-powered springs, so if you have hard military primers, you don't have any problems with the reliability from that trigger. There were, of course, multiple stocks that were used on the Block 2 M4s. The most classic of them being the LMT SOT-Mod Enhanced, which is what we have right here. Great little stock right there. And that kind of brings us to the end. You know, we can speak a little bit to the optics, in that some really good optics were selected to be used in the Block 2 program. Right here, we have an Elcan Spectre with a top-mounted red dot. Of course, at the time, it would have been a Doctor. In this case, we have Elcan's own little red dot on there right now. And the Gen 1 LCANs did certainly have some issues. The updated ones, this one has the updated arms mounts as well, were much better. You, of course, beyond that had EOTechs and several other optics like the ACOG that were also used. Now, it should be noted that additional updates were made to the Block 2 program throughout it, so you began to see endpoint T2s, and depending on the unit and how much you could do, you had a lot of people using different types of low power variable optics. You had the Vortex Razor 1-6 that was being used for a while. And more recently, during the transition, of course, you have a variety of other low power variable optics that are also used. But a note should be made for some of the initial optics that were used. The OCAN Spectre, while not the best optic in terms of eye relief or zoom function or any of that, or the ACOG, were very tough optics. So although the LCAN didn't have the best mount or the best zeroing system, it tended to work in adverse conditions, both sandy and frozen tundras. Compared to some of the other optics of the time where the teeth would break in the adjustments, you didn't have that with many of the optics that were selected under the SOPMOD program. So again, that brings us to our kind of original point, which is the Block 2 M4 is just a very robust system. Weight wasn't so much a concern as was ensuring that you had an accurate, precise, reliable, and consistent weapon. And the Block 2 M4 meets all those criteria quite easily. It is, in my opinion, just an excellent service rifle, and as it's getting replaced by the URGI, we'll have to tell and see how those are liked. I've only seen a couple of them out in the field so far, but I understand that some units are filtering them completely. So I'm always interested to kind of see what's going to end up happening, and perhaps I'm waxing a little bit poetic at the end here for the Block 2 M4, which I found to be just a very wholly reliable and just wonderful system. And that kind of brings us to the end. You know, I think that the Block 2 M4 was just for once, the military worked well. Very good products were put into place. A lot of very good assessments were made. A lot of very good tests were made. And essentially a very fine, very well thought out combat weapon came out of that. To the untrained eye, in many ways, the Block 2 M4A1 looks like a completely different weapon, especially when compared to the standard M4 or M4A1. And you know, I just can't say enough good things about it. So the cool thing about it is that these parts aren't as hard to get anymore. It used to be quite impossible to be able to build a rifle like this. Nowadays, Colt lowers, uppers, and barrels and rails from Daniel Defense are easily had. 4 prongs are easily had. And so you can easily make yourself one of these very classic weapons. And it's weird that these are beginning to become a piece of history, but that's how it goes. You know, the AR is developing at a very fast pace. In many ways, the development of the Block 1 and both Block 2 M4s were fueled by the economy, specifically because at the end of the assault weapon ban, about 2004 when it sunsetted, you had a lot of companies that were able to explode into the market that were funded by civilians, in a lot of cases military or whoever who wanted to own maybe either the weapon they had or just were happy to be free again, be able to own AR-15s. And because of that, a lot of great companies came up with a lot of great concepts. And in my mind, made the M4 from a usable and a doable platform to an exceptional rifle. So enough good things can't be said about the private community and the firearms community in general for elevating the M4 to the place that it is currently at and the place that it will currently be going. So time will tell and see what the next kind of go-to combat rifle will be. But in my mind, I will always love the Block 2 M4. But here's the thing. As cool as these things are, as much as they rock, fact of the matter is you're not gonna kick ass at them if you don't train. So get out there and get training. Tons of great places to get training from. We have Bear Solutions, Cogworks, Hilly Strategic, and Tony Cowden, of course, love that guy. Can't say enough good things. You know, your mind is a weapon, so make sure that you're training your mind to ensure that you are the thing that matters. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I've got nothing else for you. Final thing for you guys. Get outside, turn off your phone, get into nature, explore, enjoy, and think about things that really matter. It's important to disconnect from this wired and connected world at times in order to center yourself. Sometimes that quiet reflection time is very important. Taking a pause, taking a tactical pause is always a good thing to do. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Now, if you've made it this far, big shout out to Survival Dispatch. Survival Dispatch being a repository of survival information. Get in there as a former survival guy. I can't recommend enough. And finally, Patreon people, thank you very much. Love you guys. I've got nothing else for you.